Good morning. As we start our morning of remembering, we ask you to please stand and remove your hats for the singing of Bold Canada, presented by a pair of graduates of John McCrae that we remember fondly. Mae Van Hastricht, accompanied by Justin Cho on the piano.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command. Car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you. Please be seated. My name is Jeffrey Gao, and this is Rowan McKenna. We will be our masters of ceremony for today's service. In the darkest of times, Canada has always been a beacon of light and freedom. When the world needed our help, Canadian men and women answered, offering their service for a greater good, willing to risk their lives for the rights and freedoms of future generations. From the devastating disease-ridden trenches in World War I to the horrors of World War II, to the harsh valleys and rains of Korea to the blistering heat in Afghanistan. When the world called for aid, Canadian soldiers, doctors, and nurses all shouldered their share of responsibility.
Least we forget. It should not be forgotten. Least we forget are three words that should be easy to remember. These three words remind us that we should remember. The purpose of today's ceremony is to unite us as a school community to honor the Canadians who served our country and who made the ultimate sacrifice at war. Today, we remind ourselves that we should never forget their sacrifices. Our act of remembrance will be read by Colonel, Retired, and Legion Branch 641 Poppy Chair Comrade Kevin Brown.
Act of Remembrance. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Remembrance Day is officially recognized on the 11th of November in many countries around the world. This Memorial Day has been observed since the year 1919, just after the hostilities of World War I ended at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. On this day, we remember and honor the members of armed forces who have died in the line of duty while serving our country at war. As the nature of war and Canada's military purposes have changed over time, we have included those serving peacekeeping missions and those serving in ceremonial positions, such as Corporal Nathan Chililo, who died while serving sentry duty at the tomb of the unknown soldier 10 years ago in Ottawa.
Today, we will remember the sacrifices made by fellow Canadians for our freedoms. Too often we forget our history. Over time, least we forget can simply become the wording on a war memorial, and not a call to each of us to remember. Today, we encourage fellow youth to recall the sacrifices made before them, to recognize that Remembrance Day is our time to remember, and to express our gratitude for the sacrifices from our brave soldiers as shown in the following student letters to veterans.
Dear veterans, I'm writing this letter to thank you for saving the lives of so many people during the Great Wars. Your sacrifice to keep the people in our country and in other countries safe will always be remembered and appreciated by Canadian citizens. I acknowledge your pain and suffering and the sacrifice for the sake of others. You are no longer with us, however, we will still eternally remember you for sacrificing your lives for the sake of this beautiful country of Canada for many more generations to come. You may be gone, but you are not forgotten in our hearts. Yours sincerely, a JMSS student.
Dear veteran, thank you for your service. Perhaps this is not the first time you've seen a letter like this directed to you, but writing letters to the men and women who served for the rights and freedoms of this country is the least our fellow citizens can do. As a high school student, I find it difficult to understand the circumstances of being put in military service. It seems baffling to me how not too long ago, students the same age were asked to volunteer or told to enlist in the military and undergo extensive physical training, to travel overseas and face battles, to battle against other young soldiers on the other side of no man's land, to not know if they would ever make it home again. You are brave for serving our country. I thank you for your service, and I thank you for your sacrifice. Yours truly, a JMSS student.
Dear veterans, we have never seen each other before, but I want to say thank you. Thank you for representing Canada and protecting the people who live in our world. Thank you for your sacrifices for a greater cause, and thank you for protecting Canada so I can live in a safe country. Too often we take our freedoms and safety for granted, but not today. Today is our call to remember, to acknowledge, and to thank you for your service. Yours sincerely, a JMSS student.
Just as John McCrae students have voiced their appreciation to our veterans through their letters, youth in other countries have traditions in which they acknowledge the role of Canadian soldiers for their sacrifices. Specifically, Canada and the Netherlands share a great bond of friendship born of the sacrifices of our Canadian soldiers in the liberation of their country. Every year, young Dutch people recognize the sacrifices of our Canadian troops who liberated their country. In the small village of Holton, there is a cemetery where 1,395 men and 1 woman are buried. Every year, for more than 70 years, May 4th is the Day of the Dead. Members of the government, the royal family, and the citizens gather. The children place a tulip on each of the tombstones. They pause and bow their heads because they understand the sacrifices these young men made to liberate their country. In addition, on each Christmas Eve, the entire town gathers together. Dignitaries are also present to commemorate the Canadians. The children of the village place lanterns in front of each grave. In the darkness of night, all that can be seen is the glow of 1,396 candles. The people do not and will not forget the men of honor. As you can see, we the youth in Canada and elsewhere play an important role in continuing the tradition of remembrance.
We are united today as we reflect upon how we are connected to Remembrance Day as a school community. Some of us have family members who have served for our country. Some of our school community may serve for our country. And all of us in our school community are connected through our school namesake. John McCrae, whose poem In Flanders Field was penned over 100 years ago during World War I. The poppies that John McCrae saw blooming across some of the worst battlefields of Flanders are what inspired his poem, and what has become the symbol for Remembrance Day. Our grade 12 students today will join the Barhaven Legion Branch 641 in their Remembrance Day service. They will continue our school's tradition involving the John McCrae graduating class, with each senior student placing a handmade ceramic poppy around our war monument to show how we are connected to Remembrance Day.
Our tradition was inspired by the 2014 art installation called Blood-Swept Lands and Seas of Red at the Tower of London, in which over 800,000 ceramic poppies filled the tower's moat. The poppies represented every British military fatality from World War I. Today, every time we see a poppy, it helps us to remember those who lost their lives in the line of duty. Today's service provides us time to reflect upon how we are all connected to Remembrance Day. Lest we forget.
We will now listen to Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, Opus 23, played on the piano by Theo Dai. As Theo plays, we will see graduating grade 12 students who pinned poppies in remembrance of the Canadians who paid the ultimate sacrifice during World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Afghanistan conflict, and Canadian peacekeeping missions early last week.
20 days in the front lines, 30 days in support trenches, 120 days in reserves, 70 days at rest, and 2 weeks on leave. This was the life of a soldier in World War I. The Great War marked our coming of age as a nation. We were a self-governing dominion of the British Empire in 1914, so when Britain declared war, we were automatically at war. When the war ended in 1918, our war contributions led to Canadians experiencing a greater sense of national pride and identity. Many of the young men voluntarily enlisted, looking for adventure and wanting to do their duty for their country. Home by Christmas was the rallying cry. What they faced instead was the horrors of trench warfare and not knowing if they would ever make it home, alive, to see their parents, their wives, their children, their friends. In turn, the family they left behind was left wondering and worrying about their safety. We can imagine how difficult this was through the following letter, in which a wife writes to her husband, not knowing if he would ever read her words or return home to her.
To my dearest husband, John Greenwood. My heart aches for your return. It's been way too many months since I've last seen you. The children miss you dearly. They will not stop asking me when you will be back. It pains me to tell them that I do not know when you will return and that I have no news from you. The newspaper is calling you soldiers heroes, yet I cannot imagine what horrors you might have seen. The things you have likely seen must change a man. I cannot help but wonder, will you be the same man you once were when you return home? If you return home? I dread the day we might get a knock on the door to bring us the unspeakable news of your untimely death. I cannot sleep anymore because that thought keeps me up at night. Instead of resting, I find myself praying for your safe return to us. It brings me comfort knowing we look up at the same moon every night. We're all praying for your safe return home. Hopefully in time for Christmas, as it would not be the same without you. Life will not be the same without you. I hope that you read this letter, and I hope that those same eyes gaze upon me in person soon. Yours forever, Mildred Greenwood.
Grade 10 history students at JMSS conducted research to understand the history of the soldiers in the No. 2 Construction Battalion. The students learned that there is a powerful connection to the past when we learn about the individual stories of people who were involved in these events. This is a story of Private Joseph Harris and his experience in No. 2 Construction Battalion, written by a John McCrae graduate, Darby Duggan.
Joseph Harris was a 26-year-old man who enlisted in the Canadian Army in 1916. He was a member of the No. 2 Construction Battalion during the First World War. This was an important part of the Canadian Army during the First World War. Most of the men in this battalion were black men. Canada did not want these men to go to the front because of the color of their skin. These men built streets, railroads, and made war preparations for the Canadian Army. The No. 2 Construction Battalion is often forgotten in the history of the First World War, even though they had a great impact on the war for the Canadian Army. So what is the story of Joseph Harris? He was born on June 26, 1890 in Vencer, Barbados, British West Indies. Sometime between 1890 and 1916, he immigrated to Sydney, Nova Scotia, Canada, and lived there until March 25, 1917. He enlisted in the Army on July 28, 1916 in Sydney, Nova Scotia. It is not certain why he enlisted in the Army, but perhaps he wanted to prove himself and do his part for his country. It's impressive that he felt loyalty to Canada because he wasn't born Canadian. Also, the country was not very kind to black men, or our First Nations men, or other racialized people, by subjecting them to inequalities and hiding their history. However, Joseph Harris was determined to go to war. His ship left Canada from Halifax and set sail on March 25, 1917, for England. Later, he left for France. He served in the army for 1 year and 7 months in France until their battalion was demobilized on February 19, 1919.
Many of the brave soldiers eventually made it back home after World War I, but the transition back to regular life was difficult. Some dealt with physical injuries, some dealt with psychological trauma, and some continued to face inequalities when they returned home. Many more did not make it home. We remember them for their sacrifice.
Between 1939 and 1945, over 1 million soldiers, comprising 40% of the male population in Canada, enlisted in the Canadian Forces. Nearly all of these people were volunteers. Over 45,000 of these Canadians never returned home. Several families lost more than just one family member to the battles of World War II. Imagine the fear these men faced every day. Imagine the difficult circumstances they endured at every moment of every day. Through the following letter from a brother to a sister, we can understand the sacrifice these soldiers made in World War II.
My dear beloved sister, Claire, I don't want to say I'm doing fine, because I'm not. The truth is that I'm really terrified, and I don't know if I could last longer. Every day I see death. I see others suffer and wait for their time to come. I don't want to just wait for my death. When the darkness comes every night and the shootings stop for a moment, all I can hear is the weeping of other soldiers and the screams of those who are injured. Even when my eyes cry for help, there is no one to help us. I hope you read this letter and know what I would do to be with you right now. I know it's been hard since we both lost our parents and that we are far from each other. I'm just not sure if I can keep my promises to our parents that I will protect you. Not having certainty if we'll see each other again. I want you to know how much I love you. Promise me that you will continue to be brave and you'll go on no matter what happens to me here on the battlefield. Your loving brother, Jack.
We can imagine the other perspective of family at home in Canada, worrying about the safety of the men serving overseas. Through the following letter from a wife to her husband, she has finally received news that her missing spouse is indeed alive.
My beloved Wink, these past few months have been undoubtedly the most difficult times of my life. I've been told endlessly to give up, my friends repeatedly pushing me to move on, saying that you are never coming home. I've been fighting my own battles from the moment that I opened the door to the young messenger boy who stood at my steps so glum, delivering the news that you had gone missing and were presumed dead. Despite the words every soul kept reinforcing upon me, I never believed that you were gone. I knew deep down in my heart that you were still out there. I held on with every last ounce of my strength to the thought of you holding me once again. I can almost feel the warm touch of your skin in the letter I hold here in my hand. I have read these 5 words over and over again. Alive and well in London. So short and sweet, yet these words were the miracle that I had been holding out for. You are still alive. Since receiving your letter and word of your survival, I have been told many stories of your courageous acts, how you were split from your group after jumping to the opposite side of the ditch to take cover from an oncoming tank, how the men who jumped to the opposite side weren't as lucky, and how their heroic battles had been ended by that tank, how you were shot in the leg and were taken prisoner by the Germans, later escaping with a group of Englishmen. All of your courage and strength has me at a loss for words. I love you dearly, and I will see you soon, Wink. Sending you all my love and prayers, your proud wife, Gertrude.
This letter is actually inspired by the true story from a JMS's family. We can understand that although World War II was a long time ago, many of our JMSS families are connected to this war, and all of our JMSS families are the beneficiaries of the sacrifices our soldiers made to make the world a safer place. As we think about these sacrifices that Canadians have made in service to our country, we will listen to Rayan Mir as he performs the very fittingly titled Remember, written by Kenta Yago.
Just 5 years after the Second World War had ended, soldiers from North Korea crossed the 38th parallel and began the Korean War. From 1950 to 1953, Canadian soldiers fought in the valleys and the hilltops, through the monsoon rain and the summer heat. By the time it was over, more than 25,000 Canadians have served in the Korean Peninsula and spent time away from home. The Korean War is often known as the Forgotten War, but not at John McCrae. We remember them.
War is a part of Canada's past, as well as a part of Canada's present. Between 2001 and 2014, more than 40,000 Canadian Armed Forces members have served in a military capacity in Afghanistan. 1 out of every 62 Canadian soldiers did not return from their mission. Due to medical advancements, many of the soldiers who were injured will survive, but they will live the rest of their lives with their injuries from combat. In addition, many of our soldiers have to live with the psychological effects brought on by combat.
As we remember their sacrifices, we will continue the time-honored tradition of laying wreaths, one for those who valiantly lost their lives in defense of our freedom, and the other for the honorable men and women currently serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. As our wreaths are laid today, they will be accompanied by our brass ensemble as they perform Abide With Me, arranged by Jordan Grigg. The first wreath will be laid by Colonel Retired Comrade Kevin Brown, Languages Department Head Miss Monda Van Ziel, and student Lena Good. The second wreath will be laid by our Principal Steve Jackson, and our Student Trustee Sharanya Siva Satya Nadan, and our OCDSB Indigenous Trustee Ezio De Stefano. The third wreath will be laid by teachers Mr. Bill Jardine and Miss Claire Bottega. And our final wreath will be laid by social science teacher Miss Taylor Barr and student Theo Dye.
We will now have the playing of The Last Post by Noah Jang. It will be followed with 2 minutes of silence, the Lament played by Theodore Yamkinchuk, and the Reveille played by Noah Jang. As a sign of respect for today's ceremony, please remove your hats and stand.
Least we forget. The most recent sacrifices our fellow Canadians have made in the conflict in Afghanistan, as well as the many past sacrifices in the Korean War, World War II, and World War I. However, we must remember that Canadian soldiers are still serving for our country. We must recognize their hardships as they continue to fight for our freedoms of people around the world.
Dr. John McCrae, for whom our school is named, was appointed second in command of the 1st Brigade Canadian Field Artillery as a field surgeon when Canada joined the war against Germany on August 4, 1914. He treated the wounded during the Second Battle of Ypres from a hastily dug 8-foot by 8-foot bunker. During this battle, his friend and former student, Alexis Helmer, was shot and killed. We will now see into his mind on this day through a monologue as he contemplates the death of his friend.
I am surrounded by the death and dying every day, sorrowfully growing accustomed to gruesome sights and nightmares. I have witnessed torn limbs, maimed and decaying bodies, and men coated in the blood of companions and foes alike. I have amputated, operated, sewed, comforted. I am not prepared for what I have witnessed and for what I have done in the name of saving lives. The continuous eerie pounding of gunfire and rifle fire echoed within the distance of the bleak wasteland cloaked in darkness. Thick sheets of rain screened the German shell. It remained undetected until it was too late. In an instant, he was gone. My former pupil, my friend, Alex. A split second is all it took.
Later that day, John McCrae was still trying to come to terms with the death of his friend.
I have always been convinced of the need to fight for our great nation. Nevertheless, at what cost? How are we to honor those who died? Crosses mark gravesites as symbols to heal the pain while reminding survivors of what is lost. Is this sufficient? How else can we remember? Countless men, women, and children have died and will die. So many lost lives, like so many poppies swaying in the spoiled earth of the battlefields and cemeteries. Nevertheless, death chose you. I will not allow you to die in vain or to die without being remembered. As you pass on the duty to continue the fight, I vow to commemorate you. Comrade, friend, brother.
The day after presiding over the funeral and burial of his friend, Lieutenant Alexis Helmer, John McCrae was inspired to write the poem In Flanders Field on a scrap of paper while sitting on the back of a medical field ambulance. Dissatisfied with his work, McCrae tossed his poem aside. Meanwhile, a young sergeant major named Cyril Allinson watched John McCrae write the poem. After picking up the discarded poem, Allison was amazed that the poem captured the exact scene on that day in early May 1915. Unbeknownst to McCrae, Allison sent it to newspapers in England. The poem was rejected by one publisher, but was later accepted by another, and published on December 8, 1915. It has since become one of the most significant war poems ever written. Before we listen to John McCrae's famous poem, we will listen to our own flute ensemble play a version of In Flanders Field, written by John Jacobson and Roger Emerson. On January 28, 1918, John McCrae died of pneumonia, complicated by meningitis. He never made it back to Canada.
We will now hear the poem In Flanders Field, read by Celia Sitt, Josh Lee, Ray Dang, and Mariana Oba de Mesquito Sampaio, accompanied by William Healy.
In Flanders fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below.
We are the dead, short days ago. We lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field.
Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
Au champ d'honneur, les coquelicots sont parsemés de lot en lot. Auprès des croix et dans l'espace, les alouettes devenues lasses mêlent leur chant au sifflement des obusiers. Nous sommes morts, nous qui songions l'éveil encore, à nos parents, à nos amis. C'est nous qui reposons ici, au champ d'honneur. À vous jeunes désabusés, à vous de porter leur flamme et de garder, au fond de l'âme, le goût de vivre en liberté. Acceptez le défi, sinon, les coquelicots se faneront au champ d'honneur.
The voice of John McCrae continues to live on as we hear his poem recited, or as we read the words on our monument. His legacy is what connects us to Remembrance Day, as do the poppies on our clothes and the ceramic poppies in front of our war monument. Today, we want to honor and remember all 600,000 Canadians who have given their lives for our country and our freedom.
This concludes our Remembrance Day service for this morning. As our clarinet ensemble plays Come Sweet Death by J.S. Bach, arranged by Charles J. Torian Jr., and you continue with your day, we would like to ask you to think about the following. Remember the thousands of Canadian men and women who risked their lives and made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. Remember the Canadians who continue to put their lives in line for our country. And remember that we are all connected to Remembrance Day. Least we forget. Thank you.